Thank you very much for coming to this panel. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm an editor at Worn and Wound. Really appreciate everyone being here and coming out to the show, seeing all these great brands, and of course coming to our panel today, Advancing Watchmaking in the 21st Century. Really happy to have three really illustrious guests with us today to talk about Accutron and technology and how technology kind of impacts watchmaking. We'll see where we go and what we wind up talking about. Just real quick to introduce you guys to our panelists. We've got Ariel Adams down at the end here, the founder of A Blog to Watch. Ariel, for anyone who doesn't know A Blog to Watch, I can't imagine there are many here who don't. You just tell us like a real high-level overview of like kind of what A Blog to Watch is about and maybe what you're wearing on your wrist today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I've been writing about watch collecting and watches since 2007. I really try to explain everything. That's what I try to do. It's explain and answer and explain and answer and share everything. So I want all of you to know as much about watches as is possible. And it's really part of a community. I started here in San Francisco, not having enough watch buddies, went the internet to find them. And here we are today at an event in person. I got a lot of watch buddies because of the internet. So I'd say mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are you wearing?
I've got two watches on, but the one I'm going to talk about is the Accutron SpaceView 2020, first watch with a electrostatically generated quartz movement. Hopefully someone on this panel will tell you what that means.
We've got at least one person
I hope
who can
so.
do that. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what I got on my wrist.
Very nice. Richard Callamaras. Richard, you're the Accutron representative on the panel. You're the expert. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do with Accutron?
So with Accutron, I actually am the sales manager is my title, and work at a lot of different levels with the company. I'm very blessed because I'm essentially all of you. I started as a collector, and 15 or so years ago, 11 or 12 years ago, I think they found me at the National Watch and Clock Collectors Museum, and I was putting on a show with part of my collection, and that's where the relationship with us started. I started consulting with the company from a design perspective, and then the relationships really blossomed where I'm very lucky and blessed to be here with heroes of mine in the industry today and working with people like Michael Benavente and Joy and everybody at the offices to really push the brand and help it. But really, I try to just be the voice of everyone here. Like, I'm lucky to be here because I'm here to listen. So as much as I am to kind of explain and help, but we get a lot of ideas from you and try to make that happen. Something we say a lot is we're always listening.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Last but not least, we've got Jason Gong. Jason is the CEO and founder of Complecto. If you don't know what Complecto is, you probably haven't been on Watch Instagram over the last year, but maybe if that's you, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about Complecto?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zach. I appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be here and so appreciative of the Wind Up team for sharing the space with us, giving us an opportunity to meet all of you. The long and short of Complecto is that we are a community and a platform that's focused on elevating underrepresented voices in the watch industry and the collecting community more broadly. And the point of Complecto for me when I founded it a year ago was I wanted to create a community that reflected the true diversity of watch enthusiasts and lovers all over the world. And I wanted to create an environment where anyone can show up and feel safe, feel welcome, where their curiosity and their passion could be rewarded and shared in a very zero pressure environment. So come as you are. We're a people first, watch a second community, and we're all united by our passion for creating a more inclusive, accessible, and diverse industry. And so here we are, and I am so excited to be here with y'all and to be wearing a SpaceView 2020 on my wrist from Accutron, and I'm also double wristing. I've got my Seiko SNR 027, the Landmaster Prospex LX with the spring drive because we're here to talk about advancing watchmaking.
100%.
So we got some funky movements.
Great movements.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I want to open it up by asking Richard a question related to Accutron's technology. Obviously, technology has been advancing for hundreds of years in watchmaking at various speeds over the course of that long history. Just at a high level, how would you characterize Accutron's kind of attitude toward technology and what makes their technological advancements stand out? And we can certainly start with the electrostatic movement if you want, but I know there's lots of technological advancements that Accutron has made over the course of years.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
I don't feel like you have to cover it all.
Sure. To do it, like you said, high level, I think that the company was founded, and I think when you talk about like being iconic and being innovative, when you talk about innovation, I think innovation isn't about design or sales, right? So when you're really innovating, it's actually problem solving. And I think that Accutron originally with the tuning fork was problem solving for how do we get to space, right? And when we relaunched, we said, how do we problem solve for today? So when we were looking at it, I think that the company was saying, all right, so what's out there? What can we be looking at that can solve those problems? And I think, creating, a power source that's kind of like self-propelling is really, really important. So this idea of being able to create a power source that doesn't really need anything other than you to continue on in a way that really just never stops is really important. So, that's the renewable energy resource that we tried to create.
Yep.
And I think, the electrostatic is wildly successful in that.
So tell me a little bit about the electrostatic for people who aren't familiar with how that movement works. What is the technology at the core of that?
So at the core of it is, we had mentioned, Ariel just said, is that it's electrostatic energy. World's first electrostatic generators in a watch to create power. So we all know watches, and we're talking apples and oranges. A lot of people come up and they'll shake the watch or they'll start winding the pin, and it's really not what you need to do. So we want to kind of help bridge that understanding, and the way that the electrostatic generator works is that this is just like a tuning fork. It's old technology that's been reimagined, right? Mm-hmm. So, and miniaturized and done in a different way. So I think that the engineers and the team did amazing things to kind of put something that is powering dams in the size of half this room down to your wrist, right?
Yeah.
So electrostatic energy is simple. You're going to take a positive and negatively charged plate, and those positive and negative charges want to get to one another, right? So they need a catalyst in the form of energy, and any energy that comes in contact with this watch is going to power that movement. So when people are coming up to the table, and we have some people in the audience that were able to do this today, is they take a look at that and they hold that watch and it's in constant motion. It's working at that level. There's almost no way to stop it. Right, so I think it's like mesmerizing. Somebody came up and they were like, "It's worse than Instagram. It's worse than TikTok. It's worse than you can't stop looking at this stupid watch, right?" But the watch is impressive, right?
Yeah.
It's something that's mesmerizing.
Yeah. Ariel, you cover the watch industry. Obviously, you write about watches. You, as you said, you communicate information about watches to a mass audience. How do you find that readers have responded over time when new technologies like the electrostatic movement are introduced, and other technologies that are comparable in one way or maybe not comparable in those ways? Like what's the enthusiast and reader reaction from your perspective?
We have to distinguish the two types of innovation in this space. The first type of innovation is, let's make that tool better.
Yep.
And that has been what has driven the watch industry, because it's a tool industry, for most of its existence. And on one level, everyone looks at a new watch and asks themselves, does it do the time-telling tool thing better? And if it does, we get excited about it in one way. We may not buy it, but we'll appreciate it as real innovation. But there's another type of innovation that we all talk about, which I think is more salient, and that is really related to creativity. It is about taking a creative risk, and sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. But when we talk about innovation today in the watch space, it's mostly about creative risks. And you want brands to do something different. You want them to take a risk, either by designing a new movement or developing a new case or a new collection or something like that. So innovation is really the experience of seeing something new and asking yourself, how do I feel about it? And most innovative products in this space require some time to sort of burn in a little bit. Most audiences will react in a hostile way to something new because they're not familiar with it. And so you have this interesting relationship between, that looks familiar, I like it, not innovative, versus that's new and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I should wait a while before I share an opinion. But people don't want to do that. Today, they have to share an opinion immediately. So for me, that's really how people react to innovation.
Yeah. How do you feel, obviously enthusiasts and collectors react to innovation in one way and brands react to innovation in other ways. Do you have any thoughts on that, on how
I think that both of them understand the need for innovation. We're talking about buying objects that make you feel good, and by definition, each new one should do something different than the last. Otherwise, we'd have closets full of the same shirts and the same shoes, and nobody wants to do that unless you have a uniform that you have to wear. And so the innovation really comes into, does this watch make me feel a way that my other watches did not? And so both companies and consumers are trying to either produce or seek this innovation, but as long as companies are trying to package emotions a different way, there will be consumers out there that will be, as they say, sympathetic to them.
Yeah, great. Jason, where does this kind of come into play for you? How do you feel like big leaps in innovation are taken by your collector community?
Well, I think that innovation can also be relative sometimes, right? Depending on the brand that is innovating and depending on what that innovation might look like, right? And so, for example, this year, Rolex introduced see-through case backs. Now, that isn't necessarily innovative in any objective way, but that's innovative for Rolex, right? And the world went crazy, for better or worse. But I think when it comes to the collector perspective, I think that there is a lot to get excited about. When I think about innovation, it's a lot of the things that you mentioned, Ariel, but it's also, it's material innovation, right? We're seeing watches that are now, ceramic was first in bezels and then it was in cases. Now we're seeing ceramic bracelets. Same thing with sapphire, right? You're seeing watches that are coming with sapphire bracelets, 3D printed carbon, and you're seeing these innovations appear across a very broad spectrum of price points, right? Even like there are brands here that are doing some really exciting things when it comes to innovation. We see that extended to the movements, right? Once upon a time, watches, everyone wanted a big watch. Now it's like a race to the thinnest watch possible. And then it's, well, how thin can you make a complicated watch as well? So I think that from a collector perspective, there's a broad appreciation, right, for innovation, through a very broad lens. And people are excited. And I think we see that reflected through all of the different types of watches that are being made today.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in on the?
I think it's tough for me because as a collector, through and through, I always want to jump in from that perspective. But I think Ariel said something that resonated with me about, and the way that I kind of heard it was more about emotion. Right, I think emotion is a really big part. I love what you said with closets full of the same shoes and shirts, but I think emotion is a big part of it. So I think storytelling is also really important in the world today. And I love walking around, especially here, and looking at a lot of the brands that are here that you don't have as much access to all the time, and hearing their stories, the stories that are to be told here, really, they tell the stories of innovations we've forgotten about that maybe are being reintroduced. So innovation leads to inspiration, right? So I think that when you take that storytelling and you take the innovations maybe from the past that are reimagined, you had mentioned it with what Rolex had done, and there is a reimagination of how that's done. And we actually had Jean-Claude Bivier on our podcast, and he discussed what's happening in that space as well from that perspective. And to be honest, it was a riot. Like listening to that, really speaks from the cuff, speaks from the heart, incredibly passionate, and listening to things that we're saying really mimics what he was saying. And I think that sometimes you have to really dig in and hear and look for the things that are kind of hidden in inspiration and innovation.
I want to say one more thing about innovation, which I think is crucial, and is the innovation visible? This is obviously a visible hobby. We look at watches, but oftentimes, if you can't look at the product and see there's something different, then that's where the storytelling comes in. And so I think integral to this industry is the ability to communicate that hidden innovation, which is there in most products, whether it's why it was made or something on the inside or about the material that you don't know about. And so a sub-industry of the watch industry is communicating the stories of these watches because it's mostly invisible innovation.
Yeah, I feel like that's when you really start getting into that like hardcore collector enthusiast mentality, when you start really kind of like grabbing onto those invisible innovations, as you put it, because it's the stuff that isn't, it's not a flex, like a silicone, balance spring is not something that's going to be, visible at a party, but like you have something on your wrist that's quite innovative and a major development, in watchmaking over the course of the last several decades. So yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point.
And one thing I would add to that, right, in terms of the invisible innovation and things like a silicone hairspring, right, or a different material for a balance wheel, that's something that watch geeks, will gush over.
Yeah.
But to the point that you made, Richard, right, is I think the brands, right, really need to be thinking about how to tell the story for the innovation that you can't see, right? To folks that may not be the hardcore watch geeks, but still could have an appreciation for what informed that innovation, right?
Yeah.
And the value that it adds to the product in whatever way you can quantify that. So
Yeah.
I think the storytelling piece really goes hand in hand with the innovation.
Ariel, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you think brands might do a better job of storytelling. You've, kind of been. I know you have some thoughts on this, so I'm curious to.
You're the storyteller.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the things which I love about the watch industry is even though you have all these people around the world that say we love watches and do, they come from so many different backgrounds, have so many different perspectives and realities. And the issue is that people making watches in Switzerland may not know what's on the minds of people here in San Francisco or anyone else. And so getting to know the consumer on an intimate basis is crucial to knowing how to speak to them. And so what we see a lot is awkward and clunky messaging coming from, Europe or Japan, right? Quite sometimes the messaging comes across as quite clunky, like, I get there's something impressive there, but it's not quite coming through. So knowing your audience and saying a message individually to them, yes, it's a little bit more work, but that's really what it comes down to. So, an event like this is perfect. There are a lot of brands that are getting to know their consumer, and they are successful. They think that it's good to come here to meet people. It's not just that. It's good to come here to get to know people.
Yeah, for sure. Jason, you have any thoughts on that? I know you're it's part of what you do. You're reaching out to new collectors, collectors who might not have have a great relationship, with like the Swiss brands and their marketing and everything.
Yeah.
Like, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was in Geneva for Watches and Wonders a few weeks ago, and that really helped to distill for me, like, just how much of a bubble, right, the industry
Yeah.
can operate in sometimes, to your point, Ariel, right? You've got brands and decision makers and watchmakers and product folks in Geneva, in Japan, anywhere, right, where watches are being made, and they don't necessarily have the cultural context, right, to understand what different types of customers care about and what they value. And so, again, it goes back to the storytelling, but it also goes back to being intentional about how you engage different audiences to understand that there's nuance,
Yeah.
right, across different demographic groups and what folks value. And I think historically, right, I think the industry's probably thought about watch collectors, enthusiasts, potential customers in a really monolithic way. And I think, what we're trying to do with Complecto is to show that there's a ton of nuance and there's a ton of value in being able to understand what that nuance looks like and how it informs people's approach to the hobby and how they collect, right?
Yeah.
And how they perceive your innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Richard, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, and one of the things I think I appreciate from my perspective is coming up and being in the role that I'm in. We have Complecto in the office, we have Red Bar in the office, we have all kinds of influencers there, and it's what I appreciate so much, and I didn't have this perspective, and now that I'm on the other side of the curtain, I get to see that, and I'm sure it happens in other brands, and I can tell you that because when you get in front of those brands, you can see that they understand who that audience is, and I appreciate the manner in which we do it, and I love that opportunity to be here. I know in New York there was 2 shows, and I wanted to be at a show where I could hear more.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to engage with a group of people that I really believe kind of had their finger on the heartbeat of what we were doing, so that I could listen and maybe understand that story and tell it better. Because I have to say, we have a watch brand that's interesting and unique, and we work tirelessly to tell that story and tell it in a way over and over again until it hits and resonates, and then we'll take that piece and we'll put it in and keep trying to evolve that story until it really becomes something. And I mean, honestly, the relaunch, we're 3 years into it and we're still developing that story, so you were both dead on.
I'm curious from your perspective at Accutron, what
Yeah.
what works and what doesn't in terms of like that storytelling. Like what
Yeah.
when you're, because it's not, even if you're pretty seasoned in watches. Like I remember when when the press release came out for the electrostatic,
Sure.
I had to read it several times to wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
And I've been involved in this for a while. Like I have an understanding
Yeah.
of how like a mechanical movement works. I have an understanding of how like a spring drive movement works. Mm-hmm. And Seiko and quartz. Like I get it. I get like the big picture tech stuff, or I thought I did. So what were some of the challenges in explaining that? Because I think you've done a good job of kind of communicating that message to the larger watch public over the last few years. And what I'm just curious what you find works.
So I appreciate the question, and we're asking that same question over and over every day. It really is an interesting technology, and it's very complicated the way that it works. And I think what doesn't work becomes obvious when people's eyes glaze over, right? And it's like when Complecto came in, obviously you have a group of people that really want to know, and they get to the Accutron room and we all dig in and everybody's here. But when you're out in the world and you're over a counter and you're in a retail space, and these people now become Richard Accutron and they represent us, how do they tell that story in a compact space in an environment with other technologies and that's, I think, the hard part. So I honestly, I think what works best is being there. And I think that we're very lucky, and I appreciate, again, the role that I have, where my role is to go out, be at every event, go to every store in the US, talk to South America, the Caribbean, and really be there so that I can see what's happening and listen to where the pain points are and say, all right, well, how do we solve for that? How do we overcome? And we honestly invite people, and I've done it all day yesterday and today, where I give them my personal cell number and say, let's connect again. I need to talk to you more because you're helping me tell that story. You can't tell the story and get people to get it unless you're listening. Yeah. So I think listening is the most important part. I think sometimes even we maybe made the mistake to talk too much too quickly. So listening more and being a little more careful, I think, is important. I don't know how you both feel about that, but
yeah. Ariel, do you have thoughts on that? On being a good listener in the watch media?
Look, the short answer is it takes a really long time to convey the messages in these stories.
Yeah.
You need people's attention over multiple, sitting instances where they listen and get a couple of pieces, and over time they form the bigger picture in their mind together. I'm reminded of an interesting modern example of this with Omega and the coaxial escapement.
Yeah.
Okay. Technology invented by the great George Daniels, who decided he wanted to sell it to a large company that could industrialize it. He made a real improvement on movements, but it took a lot of engineering prowess to understand what he did. Yeah. So he finally gets a brand to buy it, Omega, who begrudgingly tries to industrialize it, and they have a bunch of issues. And one of the things they do, which is effective, it turns out, but it's quite accidental, is they keep repeating over and over again in their marketing this term, coaxial escapement. And nobody has any idea what it means. They do it enough times that people, A, become curious, and B, just associate this term with Omega. They don't see it elsewhere, and they're like, well, Omega's got it, no one else does. It's got to be good. It's kind of like car branding. A long time ago, I remember in the 80s, you'd see fuel injection. Most people had no idea what that means. Right. But all of a sudden, with the label on the car, you're like, I guess I want that? Yeah, sure. And that's what Omega ended up doing. So slowly over time, they didn't educate anyone on what the coaxial escapement did. They just kept telling people, we've got it, it's different, it's got an exotic sounding name, and that's what kind of did it.
Yeah.
I would say that I think you're spot on with that. And I think that there's also an opportunity for brands to do a better job at meeting folks where they're at. And I think that that's where there's a real missed opportunity is, just if you repeat the same thing over and over again, folks may become familiar with it, but they still may not understand what it means or why it's valuable. And I think as a brand, right, and you correct me if you have a different opinion here, Richard, when you're trying to tell a story, right, and you're trying to get people to understand what's unique, what's different, what's valuable, right, about what you've created, whatever that innovation might be, whatever your story is, it's critically important to know your audience, right? To understand their point of view, where they're coming from, and how to tell your story in a way that's authentic, right, to your own values and your own heritage, but is digestible, right, to folks that may not be the watch geeks, may not ever understand what a coaxial movement is, but might be really interested in how that improves the accuracy of a watch, right?
Yeah.
No, that's you're spot on. I think the challenge is what both of you said, right? Is we're always trying to make sure that we're connecting in a rich way, but we also have to be aware of who we are and who our audience is. And I think that what's unique about Accutron, and I can speak to that, is that it's an iconic brand. It had a life, and it has a new life.
Yeah.
And being able to tell that story, I think, is sometimes more important than really electrostatic.
I got to say this, and this
Tell
is a
me,
crucial element to it. Most of the time when you're talking about an industry where innovation is important, the innovation translates into a different experience of the product, right? In this industry, no matter how innovative a watch might be, it still more or less does the same thing.
Yeah.
And so the consumer isn't like, oh, finally my watch will do that or won't do that. It's this theoretical thing. And so, going what was discussed here, it has to become something which is relevant to the consumer. This will help you do this. But part of the larger issue is this is an industry which shies away from ever advertising performance in any way. So it'd be great if they said, da-da-da-da-da, now the world's most this watch, but they don't do that. There's certain legal reasons, but I would encourage the industry to actually start making some performance promises, telling consumers how your ownership or wearing experience will be different. How often do we see a watch that's all about being more accurate? No information about how accurate it is.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I get all that, but am I supposed to get excited? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Right, yeah.
So advertise performance.
Yeah. Richard, you're the watch industry
Oh my God.
representative here.
A lot of weight on my shoulders.
Yeah. How do you feel about that idea of making some sort of performance, either a guarantee or sort of
And I think again, it's all these insights are spot on, and I think that a lot of this stuff becomes something that you can recognize very quickly and easily. Here's the thing in my world is that we have high performance quartz movement, right?
Yeah.
And it runs at a great rate and keeps accurate time, right? But for us, it's more about a renewable energy resource.
Yeah.
So why does that matter? Why is that important? How do we tell that story? And how do we get that connect? Because that is the performance part, right? So it's not necessarily about timekeeping, but we are trying to kind of tell that story around this is something that is completely unique, right? There's no mainspring, there's no battery. Everybody comes and they'll pick up the watch, and again, people in the audience right now, and they'll shake it around and spin, and it's you have to tell them how that works and why that is important to understand. And there's a mechanical aspect and a quartz aspect, but this is how this interacts now.
Yeah.
But I love what you said. Is that truly important? Those are things that we're listening, right?
I think every consumer kind of has to decide for themselves, ultimately what's important to them. I think Ariel's point is extremely valid, though. That
right.
It has to do something. It has to do something. It has to do what it says
right.
on the tin.
Yeah. And I think that's what we described today. I mean, I know a lot of times I was saying in the audience is that as I'm talking to people, I'm saying this is that. But this is apples and oranges. What's the power reserve? It's an unfair question to every other watch company that exists. Because I have a watch that's been running continuously for 4.5 years.
Yeah.
I have 30,000 hours of power reserve. That doesn't fit, right?
Right.
So, let me tell you, it's a challenge. And it's definitely something that we continue to try to evolve. But there's a lot of stories to be told, and sometimes you get lost in them, and then the brand doesn't really convey anything.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the trap that you try not to fall into. Yeah. For us, it's iconic, it's innovative, it's inspired. From the designs, people connect with the watch. They'll walk by, stop, and you see the booth, it's packed. Everybody wants to know something different about the watch, and I think when we really push the idea of iconic and we do the innovation and the inspiration behind it all, I think that's really what resonates best. We're finding.
Yep.
And then we can get into it with all of us watch nerd guys who want to know the details. But I mean, there's a lot of engineers here today from San Francisco.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I had an aerospace guy I was talking to, and it was so much fun, right? Because we can really get into it. But is that for everybody?
Yeah, probably not.
It's really not. It was for him and me.
Yeah.
I think what really sticks out for me in this conversation is people want to know, is the watch going to do what it says it can do? I think at the end of the day, every watch, as long as it tells the time, is probably delivering on 90% of that promise, right? I think what is the real opportunity is, how do you make sure that your watch makes people feel something, right? And you made this point earlier, Ariel, right? It's watches should make you feel something. There's an emotion attached to every watch purchase because none of us need a watch, right? So a watch, by definition, is a luxury purchase at any price point. So what does it make you feel, right? And a brand's story plays a large role into evoking that emotion, right, in a consumer.
Yeah.
I would say that this conversation is so salient because what you're experiencing right now is the new wave of innovation communication. It's community-based, it's local. The brands have, since time immemorial, passed the buck on who explains their watches.
Yeah.
And for a long time, it's been, the humble salesperson standing there behind a counter, tasked with this large goal of, in 10 minutes,
That's you,
explain
Richard.
everything
That's
about the brand and their history and why they're competitive and all this. And
Go.
that doesn't work anymore. The reality is brands need to make people curious about them. That's their job. Make people know the name, somewhat curious about your brand, and funnel them to the publications, to the groups, to the meetings, however large or intimate, where other collectors like them can mingle and through some type of osmosis, these stories can permeate.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the brands have the obligation to create the stories, create the curiosity, and now this new ecosystem of different businesses working together in combination with the community that comes out. This is where the storytelling's happening. It's so amazing because it's intimate, and what makes it great as a hobby is you need to invest time.
Yeah.
You can't just sort of go to a store, pick up a great watch, and become a watch lover. And that's why I think it's so community-based, because it's hobby-based, it requires an investment, there's a learning curve, there's a budget curve. This is a several-year thing. And I think that especially as adults, we all look for these types of hobbies that are not fleeting.
Sure.
And that's what's quite amazing about it. So these types of events and ones like it are going to continue to be strong and developed, and there's only going to be more of it. And businesses like yours, I think, are finding that there's so many vacuums that you could fill in, so many voids. And I've seen it for 15 years, and they're still being filled, but it's a uniquely local thing. This is happening here in the United States and other countries. They're having their own types of things because watch appreciation is now bigger than any one brand, and the brands together cannot maintain the necessities of communication that the world really requires right now.
Yeah. That's a great point. I think your invocation of time is a good opportunity to say that we're running a little bit low on it, and I want to make sure that we had an opportunity to allow anyone in the audience who has questions to ask questions of our panel. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists today?
Someone has to be the first one.
Don't be scared. You guys were
We did such a great
raking me
you guys
over
did
the
such a great
coals at the
job
table.
of handling this topic. We don't have.
They're afraid of us talking more.
Thank you for all of your commentary today. So, a question on the brand. Moving on to what we had spoken before, where it's just like it's beyond the sales pitch now. Especially since 2020, we've moved on from the high resolution videos, high resolution photos. It's just like it was just like selling, right? So it's like you gave the online platform, anybody with a phone that had access to YouTube. It's like the watch that they were interested in.
Yeah.
They had everything that they needed to buy the watch. But now we see brands that are investing in the boutique experience and the retail experience, trying to build the community. Just wanted to, have your thoughts on that, especially with, when we have watch groups to consider, just expanding that community, giving people an opportunity to get to know the brands better. Thank you.
So I think, great question, and thank you for it. One of the things that I think is really unique about what we're doing is, again, my role really is to create those environments and be able to connect with all the different groups that are out there, because I kind of have that connection with them. And be able to kind of deliver the brand in a unique way, in a unique space, in a unique environment, and hopefully in a unique way. It's like I want them to get it and meet them where they're at. And our brand wants us to find that opportunity. So what we do is, along with, like you said, I mean, obviously it's a company, right? So we're gonna launch in a certain way. We're gonna make sure we're everywhere, everybody has access, and you can connect with that. But we're really digging into more long-term storytelling now, and being able to kind of share that over time with everyone, and be able to link not only, you know, the innovation in the story, but new launches, and then do it in a way where we can, as a company, be present, so that people can ask those questions or want to hear those stories, and we can be really over the counter, or, you know, on the stage and chair to chair, just listening. And what I find most unique is that, I mean, that's what's driving our company right now, is just your stories back to us, and then how do we kind of turn that into a new design, into a new, you know, a brand, you know, workflow, or, you know, and we can get corporate in, but it really comes down to listening again and hearing the stories that are being told about who we are. I mean, Accutron's a unique brand. There's a strong tie to it. People come over and they are emotionally invested in the brand. It's almost overwhelming sometimes, especially to the salesperson who feels like they just have that quick 5 minutes, and then someone hits them with, you know, my father had this, there's a ton of emotion in it, and you find yourself listening for 20 minutes before you even speak. So, you know, I hope that answers the question, but, you know, long-term storytelling and meeting everyone where they're at, trying to be there and listen.
I'll chime in here. Thanks for the question. I think what you were describing is the manifestation of the new reality, and in this reality, it's digital first, but there is a real world component. And what I mean by that is, watch collecting as a hobby is digital first. People learn about brands and models first. They probably talk about it online, but at some point you have to see it in person most of the time, if only to buy the product, right? So there is a real need for the digital space, because that's where people are learning about this, and in many instances buying it. But the real world component is so crucial. Not only do you wear these things in the real world, but you want to validate it, that it looks good on you. You want to meet other people like you that can tell you the story. You want to be in this environment where you can feel the essence of the brand. And so there is a necessary evolution of this, but we're seeing this combination of these digital elements with these real world elements, which together make the modern watch buying and collecting hobby what it is.
Spot on.
Any other questions?
I've got one.
Yes.
So there's a lot of different brands here at this event. Big brands that have been around for a century or just about. And then there's brands that have been around for 2-3 years or less than 20. So if we're advancing watchmaking into the 21st century, as this talk is called, how do the smaller brands that are innovating more maybe on a story as opposed to developing some new R&D, how are they able to convey their story at the level that the other bigger brands, longer time brands that have been telling a very long story? How can they enter the market better?
I would say innovation is not just in technology and manufacturing. It's also how you engage a consumer. It can also be a business model, right? And I think what we've seen over the last 5+ years, right, with Kickstarter brands that have evolved from raising money for one watch to creating entire collections, for example, right? That's innovation, right? A different way of connecting with the consumer, a different way of identifying what folks care about and what they want you to make, right? And so I think when it comes to younger brands, earlier in their journey, might not have the huge budgets to invest in the R&D, so you might not have all the technological innovation, but what you have is an opportunity to engage the customer differently, to tell your story differently, to create differentiated kinds of experiences that really build a level of, how should I say, passion for your brand, right? Love for what you're building. People can fall in love with the story. You know, I think about a number of the brands here, Abingdon & Co., right? People are incredibly passionate about what you're building. Brew, and pick 50 different brands upstairs.
You could literally just like name every
Everyone,
single
right?
brand.
That folks are so enthusiastic about, and it's not because everyone's innovating, right, on a technological time-telling front, but they are innovative in their design language. They're innovative in the way that they tell their story, and I think that's a piece that folks don't talk about often enough.
Thank you for that. Let me chime in here. First of all, every brand has to start somewhere, right? All the old brands, they had a beginning, and I know that sometimes it can seem difficult to meet them, but patience is a necessary part. Every new brand has to require that there is initial success. You launch, your friends, and there's some early adopters that are going to buy your stuff, but then you have to really start your branding. And the core element that you want to do, and I think this translates to everyone, and what the big brands are successful do well, is they make their customers feel good, whether it's in the buying process or the ownership process. So the brands here and the ones that have sort of graduated from this space have all been successful in making their consumers feel good, whether it's in the customer service and thanking them, or after they get the watch, there's compliments, or it seems to be in high demand, but something about the other little intangibles or tangibles that come with the watch is sort of what you need to create that emotion. So I'd rather see a brand make 5 people feel super good about that sale than 500 people who are kind of iffy and aren't going to make another purchase. And there are brands that basically sell one watch to one person and that's it. That's not enough. The lesson here is if you can sell watches to the same person time and time again because you made them feel good, find out how to do that. That's crucial.
Yeah.
That's great. Richard, anything,
No, that was
anything to add?
the two of you were spot on, and I think that continues to answer that same question. I mean, any brand, and it doesn't matter if it's in the watch industry, and I've been in other industries as well in my career. When you're building a brand, what you said is spot on, where you have the early adopters, and then you roll up your sleeves, and it gets dirty, and it gets hard, and that's where the doubt comes in. That's where you second guess. But the key is, and I see it happen, is when the ownership, right? The accessibility to that person to reach over and say, I'm going to make you feel good about this purchase. You're part of my crew, right? That's the real piece that is going to resonate and it's going to carry on. And you have to trust in that and you have to believe in that. But listen, it's not easy. I mean, I've built a lot of brands outside of here, and that's the part I actually love. You know, that hard part, that birthing process. It's painful and you get dirty and it's scary, but you know, it's really about just building trust, and that's it, right? So if that, and I have to say, it's kind of my philosophy too. That's why I'm going to every event so that they can speak to me. They don't have to worry about talking to a guy or a salesman or a salesperson from a store that might have an idea or an opinion. I'm going to be accessible, and that accessibility really allows people to connect. So I think that's really the important part. So thank you both for that, because you were, I mean, dead on.
Yeah. Thank you to all 3 of you for joining me today on this panel. This has really been a great discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Before we go, Jason, I know you have a happy hour coming up at 5 o'clock. You want to just
do,
do
yeah.
a short plug for that?
Would love for folks to hang out. Complecto is going to be hosting a happy hour at 5 o'clock. We're also going to be having a fireside chat with TJ Harris from Boulevard Accutron and the luxury brands. And anyone that you see with the Complecto shirt, they've got some drink tickets. So make sure you shake them down for a couple so that way you can enjoy the happy hour with us. So hang in there. We look forward to chatting with you more in a few.
Thank you guys again, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.